So this year, hip-hop turns 50, and that is a huge deal because hip-hop surprised everybody by becoming the global dominant form of pop music. Today on the show, you'll hear about an important part of that global dominance. We're talking about UK rap. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Listen, this year, hip-hop turns 50. Everyone say, happy birthday, hip-hop. That's a big deal. Listen, hip-hop is something we cover a lot on the show. And lately, we've been taking this moment, this big anniversary moment, to look back on the culture's rise to dominance. And not just in North America either. Because yes, hip-hop started in New York City, but the culture is now a global phenomenon. And one country that's been a part of that hip-hop conversation is the UK. Jesse Bernard is a UK music journalist and DJ who has been covering UK's rap scene for a minute. He's also got a book on the way looking at the large history of black music in the UK. It is called Escaping Babylon. I spoke with Jesse about the UK's rap history. Here's our conversation. Jesse Bernard, welcome to Commotion.
Thank you for the intro, Elamin. How are you doing?
I'm not bad, man. I'm really excited to have you here. Listen, first, an important disclaimer. We can't cover the entirety of UK rap's massive history. This is a bit of a cursory look at that history with you as kind of our tour guide in this. So, Jesse, how would you describe the journey that the UK's rap has taken to finding its identity over the decades?
It's definitely been an interesting journey, full of ups and downs as well. I think for a long time, there was a feeling or some kind of complex where the UK kind of rap scene, fans, artists themselves, the general media kind of felt as though like kind of we were under the shadow of kind of the US, at least when it came to rap. And then I think for a long time, there wasn't enough celebration of what we were able to kind of create for ourselves, kind of based on kind of the cultural and social kind of histories around the UK, particularly black people in the UK, that goes as far back as the 1950s. So looking at how that immigration has impacted music over the past, I'd say 30 to 40 years. And I think with the rise in social media and the internet, it made it a lot easier for kind of people to access music as well. The accessibility is a huge part of how music spreads. And that means that kind of music is able to travel a lot faster. So I think in that sense, the UK rap scene has been able to kind of spread its music as fast as it's been able to create it, rather than like kind of people like overseas having to wait a year, 2 years, 3 years to find out that, oh, this song is really good and it's been popping for a minute.
Yeah. Well, and that ability to find the escape velocity from like the place where you're like, oh, we are in the shadow of the US, to sort of developing your own identity. That is a bit of the journey that I wanted to talk about today. But we're going to start with this.
Gonna tell your friend that we come again, yes, we come again. We are gonna tell you about the bad boy there, me. If it no return to eat Usain, it's cool on the pussy. We are gonna tell you about the ones.
That is from 1990. That is the London Posse with their single Money Mad. Jesse, what makes the London Posse's contribution to British rap the place where you wanted to start this whole chat?
I think you can hear it in the song Money Mad. Like there's the real kind of Jamaican reggae kind of dub influence in there. And I think that was really important at the time when the song was released in 1990 in terms of shaping the UK hip hop rap identity, because before then, a lot of the rappers in the UK were predominantly adopting American accents and rapping in American accents, even though most of them have probably never even left London, let alone left the country.
Right.
So it was interesting that rappers at that time felt that was the way in which people would, I guess, relate to their music. And then London Posse comes along and they're like, no, we're going to do it in our own style, our own sound, our own steez, everything that comes with that, like kind of, especially from being from London. And I think that would have been very empowering. It's like, oh, like these guys are making rap music, but it's in their own accents. And you can hear the influence of the older generation that came before them in it as well. And I think that's very important as well. I think London Posse showed people that you can still pay homage to your roots as well, particularly for reggae music, which is like kind of what we consider roots music here in the UK. And then over the years, you start to see kind of how that impact kind of influences kind of future generations in rap as well. And you still hear kind of Caribbean accents in rap these days, in other kind of adjacent sounds as well.
Honestly, that struggle to sound like yourself and not sound too American is something that here in Canada we know all too well. Our rappers here, particularly in Canada, know all too well. Jesse, I want to take a moment to get your thoughts on the state of women in UK rap. Interestingly enough, some of the earliest UK rap breakthroughs on this side of the pond were Moni Love, the Wee Papa Girls, and Nena Cherry, who wasn't UK born and raised, but was calling it home when she blew up with Buffalo Stance.
Who's that gigolo on the street with his hands in his pockets and his crocodile feet hanging off the curb, looking all disturbed as the boys from home? They all came running, they were making noise, manhandling toys. That's the girls on the block with the nasty curls, wearing padded bras, sucking beer through straws, dropping down their drawers. Where did you get yours? Gigolo, huh?
How do you describe the situation for women rappers specifically in the UK?
I think it's definitely been a lot harder for women in rap in the UK. I think for every 5 to 10 male rappers or groups that you can kind of recall and name, there's probably 1 or 2 kind of female rappers that come along with that. And they're usually the same rappers that people will always cite because they're the easiest names to cite.
Yeah.
That places them on an unfair pedestal, and it kind of makes them feel like they're the kind of token choice as well. But when you look across the spectrum of kind of rap music in the UK, look back at the history, I think it's really diverse, and there's a rich history when it comes to women in UK rap.
So we started by talking about the early 90s, but by the late 90s and early 2000s, even at that point, there was no question that UK rap was a force on par with anything coming out of the US or Canada. You had Roots Manuva, you had Dizzy Rascal, Miss Dynamite, there was a So Solid crew, there was Wiley. But another thing that UK rap had was that the BBC's One Extra digital channel that played black music just like 24/7. And that sets the bar for what public broadcasting support can do for you. What do you think One Extra did for UK rap that was missing up until that point?
I think it gave One Extra gave UK rap and all black music a permanent home as well. When you think about the fact that a lot of black music, particularly on the radio, was heard on pirate radio stations, or you might hear the odd pop song that manages to make it to the mainstream and make it to national radio. So whether it was drum and bass, grime, even reggae or R&B, a lot of that music was played on pirate radio stations. And I think One Extra allowed artists to see that you can go much further than just your local radio. You can make it national. Like, obviously social media and digital music has kind of changed things a bit, but historically speaking, I think radio is still king when it comes to music.
All right, take a listen to this.
Yo, I swear it was like around the times when things were going well, when we had to pack guns and then Asher went jail, and then couple months down the line, me and Morgs think about doing mad time in these mums. Then I hugged her, I don't know how it came around like this. Then she looked and said, look after the album, Swiss, and make sure that you learn something out of this.
If you're just joining us, my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion, a bit of Swiss from the So Solid crew with Cry, that's released in 2005. We're taking a brief trip across the history of UK rap with music journalist and DJ Jesse Bernard. He's got an upcoming book called Escaping Babylon, which traces the history of black music in the UK. Jesse, what's going on? Why'd you pick this song?
For a number of reasons. I think when you talk to any kind of young black person who is like kind of a teenager or a little bit older, it came out at a time where there are a few kind of killings, particularly like racist killings. There was one in the north of England around the time, Anthony Walker, and obviously you had Stephen Lawrence in the early 90s, 1993, and so these were conversations that we were always having, but mostly in the household. It was always your parents telling you had to work twice as hard, like kind of, but not giving you the context as to why that was, like kind of why life was actually difficult for black people in the UK.
Yeah.
And I think Swiss he articulated everything that we've been feeling.
So earlier in the conversation, we were talking about the role that Jamaican and Caribbean culture has had on the UK rap movements from the very beginning. But I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the other Black communities that have really had a significant role in shaping UK rap. For example, you're half Nigerian and half Togolese Ghanaian. Where do you see your own culture showing up in UK rap's history?
Grime. There's been a long debate about whether grime and UK rap and hip hop are the same thing. They're not the same thing, but they sit in the same realm and they live in the same worlds because the people that make it come from the same neighborhoods. So for me, kind of seeing kind of young West African kids making grime and kind of stepping into kind of worlds of music which weren't necessarily typically their own, like kind of spoke to kind of what the UK is about. Like that's partly why Afrobeats has been thriving a lot in the UK, because there's a kind of generation, and even still today, there's a generation of people that just grew up on Afrobeats because they listened to music that felt familiar, that reminded them of home. And then you blend that with what's being made in the country that you're now moving to. Something unique and something special can come out of that, which is what we're seeing today with Afrobeats.
All right, take a listen to this.
Go. If you're talking the hardest, gigs better pop up in your thoughts as an artist. Jeez. Talk in the market, everybody wants to know where walk in the park is. Walk in the party, sport in the
That is a bit of gigs. That song is called Talking the Hardest, which samples US rapper Status Quo's earlier song, Here We Go. We now have a foot in the last decade or so of UK rap. What makes Giggs' place in that history so important?
Like even just hearing that song now, like just takes me back to 2007 and 2008, and just hearing that in house parties and in the club. And I don't think there was anyone like Giggs before Giggs came along. There were rappers that were jumping on US beats, but Giggs just had his own style. He had his own voice, but Talking the Hardest literally changed everything.
Not to be too Canadian about this, but when Drake did KMT with Giggs,
I heard you and I'm kissing my teeth.
that was a moment here. Was that a moment for you too, or no?
I think the whole album was a moment, and it kind of reflected where UK rap had kind of gotten to at that point in time.
That's the More Life album from Drake, but yeah.
Yeah. And people joke about kind of his Batman lyrics at the end.
Batman.
But it's memorable. It's funny. It's corny. It's cheesy, but it's memorable. And I think that's something that you need in music with a song like that, is to create something that's memorable.
Listen, at this point, UK hip-hop culture is not just a thing that is across the pond looking for validation from North America in any kind of way. You have like artists like Stormzy and Skepta, they're respected names here. You also have, you got rappers like Asher D, a.k.a. Ashley Walters, and Lil Sims, who are in the beloved Netflix show Top Boy. But I'm curious where else you see the influence of UK rap right now.
The influence of UK rap is everywhere. When you talk about the impact of drill and what UK rap currently has on the world.
Yeah.
Most of the drill I hear today is UK drill.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because we talk a lot about the idea of sometime in the last 10 years or so, hip hop becoming like the main mode of pop culture or pop music, let's say. But when we say that, we really are referring to UK drill and Chicago drill. Like those are the two that have kind of climbed the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And it didn't seem obvious when drill came out of Chicago. And then when UK drill kind of added to that conversation, and even Brooklyn drill, it didn't seem obvious immediately that this was going to be the kind of music that just has a grip on popular music or popular culture or in the charts, but it has had the staying power. What do you make of the staying power of drill?
It's an interesting one. I think obviously drill has created a lot of debate.
Yeah.
Artists have been given kind of court orders to prevent them from performing certain songs and performing live shows, and there's been all kinds of censorship and surveillance around drill music in the UK. When kind of young people are growing up in worlds of violence, how they view the world is based on what they see and what they experience. So why would the music not reflect that? So until those issues kind of get kind of get solved and kind of get dealt with by the people that have been elected to deal with them. It's going to continue to reflect people's everyday lives and what they have to experience. And that's not to say every kind of young person goes through these things, but when the majority of a country is working class and doesn't have much to their name, that's going to impact everything, even pop culture as well.
Well, I was going to say, I was going to close by asking you like a bit of an impossible question, I guess, which is to try to look at the future of UK rap, because we are at this moment where so many things are uncertain, right? Like AI is setting itself up as like the big disruptor of culture in so many different landscapes as we knew them. Not to mention there's like the blurring of lines between like what's rap versus what's R&B versus actually who cares about what is a genre anyway. Where do you see UK rap heading in the next decade?
That's a really good question. I think we've now reached a point where if we're not already in a golden age or had our golden age, we're approaching our golden age. I think we're in it already. Personally, just the kind of sheer amount of artists that are kind of coming out and making music. And I do my best as a writer, as a journalist, to kind of try and capture the mood and the essence of what's going on in the UK. But I see it continue to take kind of even more like kind of steps than it's currently taken over the past 10 years. I think there's obviously going to be a new generation that's going to emerge over the past 10 years. So as long as Stormzy's around, as long as Skepta's around, as long as Kano is around, as long as Little Sims is around, I think UK rap is going to be in a beautiful place. I don't think it's going to go downhill from here. The only way is up for me personally.
Jesse, I think that is a lovely place to leave it. Thanks for being on the show.
No, thank you for having me, Elamin. I really appreciate it.
Jesse Bernard is a music journalist and DJ. His upcoming book on the history of black music in the UK is called Escaping Babylon. It is set to be released next year.
My brothers don't die, we just rusty bark. I tell your girl to link me at the coffee shop. Getting freaky in the sheets, we're taking body shots. Then I finish with a facial just to top it off. Ay, my brothers don't die, we just rusty bark. I tell your girl to link me at the coffee shop. Getting freaky in the sheets, we're taking body shots. Then I finish with a facial just to top it off. Ay, you ain't got a clue, let's be honest. I had a couple seasons made a forest.
Come on, that is a huge banger. That's Vossi Bop by Stormzy. An example of why Stormzy is one of the UK's biggest rap stars. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you're listening to Commotion.
Why do I feel so alone? Like everybody passing through the studio is in character, as if he acting out a movie role. Talking bullshit as if it was for you to know. And I don't have the heart to get these the cue to go, so they stick around.
That is a bit of Say What's Real off Drake's monumental mixtape, So Far Gone. Listen, if you're a day one Drake fan, you probably remember exactly where you were the first time that you heard So Far Gone. And chances are you downloaded So Far Gone off DatPiff.com, because long before Spotify, long before streaming was a thing, the mixtape was everything. And DatPiff.com was one of the most popular mixtape sites of that era. Now there is a race to archive the mixtape catalog on sites like DatPiff. Brian Josephs recently wrote an article for the New York Times that gets into all of this. Here's our conversation. Listen, just to be clear, we are not talking about the original mixtapes that were on cassette. We're talking about digital mixtapes that became available online. What role did those mixtapes play, do you think, in hip-hop's rise to mainstream dominance?
Well, when you want to talk about modern mixtape culture, you really got to start in 2007. That was the year when the SWAT team raided DJ Drama and his partner Don Cannon's offices in Atlanta. This was a big deal for two reasons. DJ Drama was, of course, one of the biggest mixtape DJs at the time.
Yeah.
And even though he did not serve prison time, it freaked a lot of people out enough to push mixtape culture from the streets to online databases like DatPiff and live mixtapes. And in that new space, artists started to take advantage and started releasing music at a more accelerated rate, and went around the whole record label process.
So you wrote about the significance of this specific mixtape site, DatPiff.com. What do you think it was that made DatPiff so special?
Well, a part of it was that is the more practical stuff. Like they gave themselves legal cover. The lawyer who worked with DatPiff or spoke to for the article mentioned that he took takedown notices very seriously, which meant that it didn't sell mixtapes, and it wasn't DatPiff itself uploading the mixtapes. It was the artists uploading the mixtapes. And so it would be hard to argue a RICO case against that. And plus, I think DatPiff was really good at tying itself to the era's major releases. I think a big example you could say is 2012's release from Meek Mill, Dream Chasers 2. When it released, it crashed the servers. And of course, like, if you're a website, you don't want your servers to crash on like one of the biggest mixtapes of the year. But the servers crashing sort of like increased the mixtapes myth. And you would have a serious blind spot, like if you were to talk about some of the biggest artists today without mentioning DatPiff.
What's been happening with DatPiff lately that has been getting all this media attention?
Well, DatPiff hadn't been in a lot of people's minds for a while. By the time it was bought by Media Lab in 2019, everything was about streaming services. They were more accessible and they had quite a few dollars behind them. What made people started thinking about DatPiff again was when it looked like it broke. In March, it would look like a barely functioning website. A lot of the links was broken, and yeah, you couldn't access a lot of mixtapes. So people thought that was it.
Given the popularity of DatPiff, especially in its heyday, there are so many people who would have downloaded mixtapes from that site. In your mind, why is it important to go the extra mile and do the archiving work, archiving DatPiff's mixtape catalog?
I mean, I get that listener might look at a streaming services and look at like the vastness of their libraries, but the vastness is kind of a mirage. It does not have everything. For example, I'm thinking about Rick Ross's Rich Forever, Clips's We Got It for Cheap series. Those were huge mixtapes when they came out, and they still are, but they aren't on those platforms. And plus, you don't have the context either. Like, there's a reason why people treasure newspaper articles when contextualizing certain events, because those are firsthand accounts. It's the same thing for hip hop. Even when it comes to the comment sections or blog posts covering the releases, those are essential. When I was doing interviews for the article, a lot of people drew comparisons to the Egyptian Library of Alexandria, like when that library got destroyed, and this is like BC. Like, none of us thought this was hyperbole. And,
that makes me think of the fact that mixtapes are by nature just kind of unchangeable, right? Whereas with streaming, artists can, in fact, go in and edit the versions of songs that they do upload to streaming. This happened with Kanye West when he put out, in 2016, he put out The Life of Pablo, and then he decided that he wants to go back in and change some of those songs. We do tend to think, I think, culturally, of streaming services as like, this is the only version of the song that exists, and these are all the songs that do exist. When you think about young people who have this relationship with Spotify or Tidal or Apple Music as like, this is all the music in the entirety of the universe, which is just not true. What do you think needs to happen in order for us to change that perception?
Just awareness. Like, they need people to be like, hey, Mac Miller's mixtape wasn't like that when we experienced it, or this is what it means when a DJ yells over a particular mixtape track. There's someone who I've interviewed for the article mentioned that, like, it's that era has become one of those times where you had to be there to be there. Yeah, and if you know, you know. And yeah, that it's tragic when you think about, like, you have to experience the place where it's like it's such recent history, where it's like if there's an archival effort, it doesn't necessarily have to be like that.
Well, Brian, I really appreciate you being here to sort of set the record straight on where DatPiff is right now, and also its importance in the larger story of hip hop. Thanks for your time, man.
No problem. I appreciate you having me.
Of course. Brian Josephs is a senior staff editor of the New York Times. He recently wrote an article on the history of DatPiff and why it's important to archive the mixtape catalogs of sites like DatPiff. And that is it for the show. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, I'm going to be here tomorrow. So if you're going to be here tomorrow, I'd love to see you then.